How's it going, guys? My name is Zach with the Movie Castle, and today we're going to be talking about The Hellbound Heart. This is from 1986 and is the novella that would become Hellraiser. So yeah, this is where we first meet Pinhead. This was written by Clive Barker, who would go on to write the script for and direct the movie, so this is very much his initial idea, essentially an earlier version of the story. More on that in a second. Let's begin by doing a very quick, brief plot synopsis so we know what this is about. I'll be avoiding the end bits, so no major spoilers. But what's the setup? We open up with Frank Cotton. He's a man who has, he's a pretty big criminal, but he's gone through life and experienced every conceivable pleasure, and he's bored with life when he hears about a special music box, the Lament configuration, that through a series of motions opens a spiritual pathway to another dimension where beings known as the Cenobites can take you to the farthest reaches of pleasure. However, you go so far into pleasure, it circles around and becomes pain again. The Cenobites are really deep into this stuff, way more than Frank bargained for, and they will kill him and drag him into hell. Well, eventually the house where he does this all in is occupied by Frank's brother, Larry in the movie, but Rory in the book, and his wife Julia. Now, he doesn't know this, but Julia, right before their marriage, had an affair with Frank, and she secretly still misses him. She, just like Frank, is unsatisfied with her life and really wants him back. Well, why reworking the house? Rory cuts his hand open and bleeds in the floor of the damp room, the room where Frank died. And this blood is going to mix with residue of Frank and pull him back through the dimensions. And eventually, Frank will make contact with Julia and tell her, I need more blood. I need to be pulled back through, and I need to rebuild my body. I need you to give me blood. And hating her life so much as she does, she gives into this. She goes to local bars, she lures men up into the damp room, and she feeds them to Frank. Now, while all this is going on, we have Kirsty, the hero of the book, a family friend, and secretly had a crush on Rory. And she is going to eventually uncover that Julia is up to something and find out the big cosmic horror. And I guess let's get into a bunch of the stuff that I really like about this. First and foremost, it's actually pretty short. Clive Barker does really good work in short format. A lot of you guys know him for the Books of Blood. Really great short story series, and a lot of those short stories were between 30 and 60 pages long, enough to really get you into the world without overstaying their welcome, and for as short as they were, there's a ton of meat on the bones there. The Books of Blood had so many great concepts that were developed so well, even though they were short stories. And The Hellbound Heart really does feel like a Books of Blood special. It's 160 pages-ish, more or less, depending on your printing. I think, what does mine come to, like 164, I think? So yeah, you can read through it really quick. It's a short, quick read. There's no fat on this, yet it's got so much in its creative story, its concepts. There's a lot to like there. And it's one that I read before with the new Hulu movie coming out. I figured it was a good time to give this a reread. And overall, I really do like this book. It's one you can read over and over again. which, you know, especially when you get stuff like Stephen King who goes like 1,000 pages, it's hard to find time to reread that stuff. But I really do like cool novellas like this, short stuff. You go in, you sit down, you have a good time. And it feels kind of like an alternate universe version of the movie. And I think the story is Clive Barker wanted to make The Hellbound Heart as a movie. However, he couldn't get it made as a movie because there wasn't enough interest. So he had, from what I remember, the plan of writing it as a book, and the book gets interest in order to make them want to make the movie. So this really does feel like an early draft of the movie, because that's kind of what it is, and that also explains why it's short. If you know you're going to be making it into a movie, don't put stuff in that you're just going to have to cut out later anyway. And because he actually got to write and direct the movie, he was able to control the shape of the story and how it changed. But there's a bunch of little differences that make it interesting, but it's not like 100% crucial that you read the book. You know, there are some stories where it's like, if you haven't read the book, you missed out on a whole lot. It's a fun read, but if you're looking for more stuff on the Cenobites and stuff, this is really more interesting as far as this is what the early version of that story is. And there's a lot of cool little differences. I guess one of the bigger ones, Kirsty in this book, she is more of a quiet, nerdy character, and Rory is someone she had a crush on, never did anything with that, never acted on it. He runs off and marries Julia, and she's kind of like a family friend who they have over from time to time, not as much the rebellious daughter as she is in the movie, and also, yeah, daughter. Really kind of weird that in the movie, Rory, then Larry, is her father, and knowing about this early version, that's kind of funny, but also, it makes a ton more sense in the movie. Having Julia be the evil stepmother archetype, and also having her be related is really an excuse to have her in the story much more, because Kirsty actually doesn't do terribly much until the end, which is, again, kind of odd. You know, she's the hero, but she's not in the book that much. More on that in a second. But another big difference is the Cenobites. And the easiest way to explain it is, in the book, they're monks, not monsters. So they do have their own little gimmicks and their own visual interest, but they're not these big monsters that run in like the movie. And I get in the movie, they need more screen presence, you know? They can't be as toned down. They have to really be cool and tough and visually interesting and threatening. And it's the 80s, they have to be 80s monsters. But I do like the interesting alternate version we get here. They're described as kind of like monks. Their faces are covered with ash, which is why they're so pale. And their bodies are so heavily scarred and worn away over the years. They're described as essentially gender undefined because they're reduced to just vague human shapes, which is really, really interesting. And each one has their gimmick, but they're not exactly like in the movies. For example, Pinhead, again, not named Pinhead in the book, not really even lead Cenobite. 1 second on that too. But Pinhead is described as having a tattooed grid on his head and jeweled pins. And that's one thing. Jeweled pins and a tattooed grid, it really makes me think that rather than just a design, this was like you would take the pins and every day put them on the same spot on your tattoo, and that makes it feel much more like a religious ritual, you know? Special jeweled pins ritualistically placed in the same spot. The other Pinhead, the other Cenobite is one that's described as having a bunch of hooks through like around his eyes, and I think he has like bells hanging from his neck or something. But the hooked one actually talks first. Now, the Cenobites are kind of an amalgam where it will say that a Cenobite said something, but you don't really know who said it because it could be anyone from this mass. So it leaves you wondering who said what and who did what. But I think the Cenobite with the hooks is actually more of the lead in this book. However, since it's hard to say who did what, retroactively a lot of the lines in here are attributed to Pinhead. After that, we get one whose face has been recently cut and is swelling. So you know how, I think they called him Butterball in the movie, he was the big one. But in this one, it's not that he's just big, it's that he's swollen from all his cuts, which I thought was an interesting thing, but I see why they reinvented it to make it simpler in the movie. And then you get the fourth Cenobite, who is, she doesn't say anything during the initial encounter with Frank. She has a hood over her face, but the fourth one is the one that kills Frank. Like I said, to the initial gaze, they're all gender undefined, but this is the one that after Frank goes on this really big sensory trip, he sees her on a throne of heads, and she essentially has sex with him until he dies, which that wasn't in the movie. And also, the book does cut away. It's not super graphic, but, well, okay, it's pretty graphic, but not as graphic as you might think. But yeah, the fourth Cenobite, the hooded one, is the only one that's confirmed female. Again, people had suspected that Pinhead might be because he was described as having a girlish laugh, but it's never confirmed. But she kills Frank. In this whole opening, the Cenobites come up, the Cenobites talk to Frank, you feel like you understand their worldview. It talks about how they're a hell cult, the Order of the Gash, and I really, in the movie they cut this down, A, for money, but B, in the movie they want the Cenobites to stay off screen a long time. They want them to be this twisted, messed up reveal that when you see them it's like, oh no, it's Pinhead. So I get why they cut the opening down, but the opening with Frank, the extended version in the book, seeing him talk to the Cenobites more, getting more of this scene, seeing an extended version of his death, again with the female Cenobite on the throne of skulls, it's all really cool, and it's kind of sad that they had to cut that part out for the movie. Another thing, too, that's really interesting here, Julia is the main character. And, you know, having Kirsty not be related in this one, she's kind of pushed off till the end when she gets drug into the book. But really, the story is where Julia is the main character, and it's kind of weird following the villain around, you know? Julia is going to be sacrificing people to the creature in her room, and it's just, and I think it's because, you know, this is a shorter story. If you guys don't know, whenever you do fiction and stuff, the shorter it is, the more you can get away with bending the rules because it's less of an investment to the audience. So yeah, you do short stories like the Books of Blood, you can have things go relatively big and relatively crazy, and you're much freer to do that in a short story. And The Hellbound Heart is like, hey, we're only 160 pages, let's just follow the villain around, why not? Let's break that rule. And, you know, it is fitting more with the theme of the book. The book is all about desire and not getting what you want, and that leading you down a dark path, wanting something more. And in many ways, Julia does echo Frank, but someone who hadn't gone that far and gotten themselves killed. You know, so it is interesting to follow around the villain for most of the story. And yeah, it really just, it is the driving force here. And also, in the book, seeing Julia's head and knowing her, what she's thinking. In the movie, when, you know, you can't go into character's head as easy in a movie. So their relationship seems much more stable. But in the book, every little time Julia is displeased, you know about it. And you really wonder, like, wow, their marriage is on such rocky ground. But then, you know, kind of when you see the movie version, you're like, oh, yeah, I guess you wouldn't notice it's on as rocky ground as it is when you're not spending all this time inside the character's head, you know? So that is played up a lot more. But overall, yeah, like I said, Hellbound Heart really is an early draft for the Hellraiser movie and really does feel like an alternate universe take on the story. Interesting to see the changes, but not 100% crucial. If you've seen Hellraiser the movie, you get the gist of the plot. There are differences, you know, like especially Frank being less physical in this. He's more otherworldly. He's trapped behind the walls, and the blood not only builds him a new body, but also pulls him through into our dimension. But it's hard to get across cosmic horror on screen, so just have him be a super thin skeleton thing at first, you know? So it is interesting to see the alternate universe version of it. Not crucial, but if you want a fun book to read, you want a short book that you can blow through. I know a lot of people read this in a single sitting, maybe 2 sittings. It's just a fun, quick Clive Barker read with all his fun original characters, his dark themes, and it's a great introduction to Barker, this and the Books of Blood. Overall, a really good book, and I read it before, and I read it again for this new movie that's coming out. It's a good recommendation. Anyway, to everyone who's watched so far, thank you for watching. To everyone who's liked and subscribed, thank you. You really are helping the channel out. I'll put a relevant playlist on the bottom. This should be my Clive Barker playlist. If you're watching this video when it first came out, the playlist is a little bit young, so I'm working on filling that out in the future. But you can still see my complete Hellraiser DVD collection in there, what you guys might be interested in, as well as the Tales from the Dark Side episode about the Yattering and Jack. I did my review for that one, so there is some stuff in here. Anyway, have a good day. I'll see you guys again very, very soon. Clive Barker playlist on the bottom here. Have a good day now.